I want to talk a little bit about utilitarian psychology and the sort of utilitarian picture of the person. So there are two key things that utilitarians think about people. The first is that we're social, and the second is that we're sentient, meaning that we can feel. So by sentient, we mean is capable of feeling, and in particular, we're interested in feeling happy and or suffering, but more broadly, being capable of feeling pain and pleasure, having some sort of sensory experiences. That's what we mean when we say that something is sentient. What do we mean by happiness? Well, on the one hand, there's sensory pain and pleasure, so nice, pleasant flavors and smells, sexual pleasure, dancing, physical pleasure, right? On the other hand, there's sort of satisfaction and fulfillment and activity. So social connection, so actually sex can be a way of connecting with somebody else. Dancing can be a way of connecting with somebody else. But then, you have lots of relationships with your family, and those are not always happy, but they can be, and they can be a source of really deep happiness. Being on a team of, a competitive team or a team at work or whatever can be an important social connection. A team at church, if you go to church, all sorts of social connections. Fulfilling and purposeful, meaningful activities. So that might be what you do in your career. It might be being a parent. Hopefully we find in our lives some sort of activity that is challenging and helpful and rewarding that we really can be engaged in and find to be sort of satisfying and worthwhile. And then mental cultivation of different kinds. So, hobbies and things like that. So those are all parts of happiness. Now, there's a lot more to be said about what happiness is. There's actually a lot of research into what happiness is. And the utilitarian does not need to provide us a complete theory of what happiness is either. They can say, well, I know that happiness is good, even though I don't know exactly what happiness is, and that's what we should be that's what we should be promoting. So there's a point here about Mill's terminology. He uses the word pleasure, but what he really means is happiness, and there are reasons why he's using the word pleasure, but they're not good reasons. He means happiness. He should have used the word happiness. So that's the way we'll be talking about utilitarianism, and not limited strictly to pleasure, meaning physical and sensory pleasure. Mill distinguishes between the quantity and quality of pleasure. We're not going to worry about that distinction either. It's important, but it's not super important, and there are other things that we want to spend more time on. Okay, so that's happiness. Then Mill and sentience. So there are sentient beings, those are the ones that can feel pain and pleasure, happiness and suffering, and we're sentient, but presumably lots of other beings are as well, dogs and lizards and birds and so on. One thing that's important about humans and some other animals is that we're sociable. We have what you might think of as fellow feeling in Mill's terminology. So what does that mean? Well, so we're talking about friendship, loyalty, sympathy and empathy, and love. It's the ability to see another being as like me in having a mind, and more specifically like me in being capable of feeling pain and pleasure, happiness and suffering, and of caring about that happiness and pleasure, pain and suffering that they have. And we can do that in a lot of different ways, but we see fundamentally these are different ways of seeing another being as like me and as important in ways that I'm important. So these are a response to the value of others. It's how we understand that others' welfare is valuable. It's how we get that, and it's motivating, right? When you're a friend, you see the other person, your friend is valuable, as important. You care about their welfare. You're motivated to help them out. So this sociable fellow feeling is imperfect. It's partial, meaning that we care about some people more than others. Our sympathy is not universal by any means. And it's natural that it's partial, right? We're evolved creatures, and we didn't evolve to be easily capable of feeling equal sympathy for all other sentient beings. And in many situations, that's okay. Of course, it makes sense for us to care more about the people we're close to and that we can have more impact on. But on the other hand, maybe in other situations it's not okay, because our fellow feeling can be biased. We can care more about some people we're close to and less about other people, even though those other people are just as important, and we might actually be able to help them more in certain ways. So there are imperfections in our fellow feeling, and Mill is aware of that, and one of the things that Mill wants us to do is improve at least from Mill's perspective, there are imperfections, and he wants us to improve our fellow feelings so that we love all sentient beings and have sympathy for all sentient beings. So just to sort of summarize this, what's good happiness, we talked a little bit about what happiness is. It's pleasure, but also satisfaction. What's bad? Suffering, so pain and dissatisfaction, basically. What's the right action? It's to promote happiness and avoid suffering, and that's overall happiness and overall suffering, not just my own, but every suffering of all beings, happiness of all beings. How do we recognize value? Well, fundamentally, it's through sympathy. We're capable of having feelings in response to other people's feelings, and that's how we recognize the value of their feelings of happiness and suffering. And so the virtuous person is going to love all equally, and is going to act for all beings' benefit. Okay, so that sort of fills out the utilitarian picture a little bit in terms of sort of how they're thinking about happiness and which beings are valuable and so on. In the next video, we're going to look at actually an argument for the utilitarian view that the right action is to promote overall happiness and avoid overall suffering.